Booker brings her heart to the intersection of Dharma, embodied wisdom, and liberation. She speaks nationally on expanding our vision around culturally responsive teaching and changing the paradigm of self and community care. Throughout her career, Booker has contributed to the advancement of her field both in theory and practice with New York's most vulnerable populations, and taking her practice off the cushion. She's the co-founder of the Yoga Service Council at Omega, the meditation working group of Occupy Wall Street, co-author of Best Practices for Yoga in a Criminal Justice Setting, contributor to Georgetown Law's Center on Poverty and Inequalities Report, Gender and Trauma, Somatic Interventions for Girls in Juvenile Justice, Yoga, The Secret Life, and contributed to Sharon Salzberg's book, Happiness at Work. In 2020, Booker graduated from Spirit Rock's 4-year teacher training and was a Sojourner Truth Leadership Fellow through the Auburn Seminary, voted by her peers as one of the 12 most powerful women in the mindfulness movement. I'm proud and I'm grateful to call her a friend. Booker and I met maybe 7 or 8 years ago at a little gathering at Omega. And as soon as I met her, I was like, I want to be friends with this person. Like, she just exuded charisma and humor and warmth and compassion and mindfulness and presence and all of these qualities, and just someone who I just want to be around. And so I'm excited to be around her today, even virtually. So with that, I will turn the floor over to my friend Booker.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Chris, for that warm welcome. And before I begin to teach, I like to kind of scroll through and see who's in the room, and it's really fun to see friends from all different parts of my life kind of coming together, converging in this place. And so I just have such deep gratitude for the invitation from my dear friend, Dr. Chris Willard, and for to be with you all here at the Mindfulness and Compassion Grand Rounds at Harvard Medical School. And so I first want to address the elephant in the room, which is my background. My partner and I, it's funny when people invite you to do things, you don't really know where you're going to be at that time in your life, emotionally, mentally, physically. And so Chris offered this invitation to me several months ago. And in that time, my partner and I moved into our dream home a week ago in the middle of that lovely blizzard that we had. And so we are still in the process of transitioning from, hi, sweetie, so good to see you. And so waving to Chris's daughter. And so we are still in the process of transitioning from apartment living into home ownership. And there's so much work to do. I heard the rumors. I had no idea how hard it was to move into a new home. And so this is an illustration of what it looks like to, living in the midst of life and transition. So this is what it looks like. So I know I definitely see some old friends in the room, and I'm also new to a lot of you. So I want to take a moment to introduce myself a little bit further. So my name is Leslie Booker, and folks have been calling me Booker for as long as I can remember. I'm a queer Black woman, and my life is fueled by an ethic of love, compassion, faith, equity, and justice. I was raised by liberal Black Republican parents, and there's a lot of oxymorons there. And after spending most of my adult life in New York City, my partner and I moved to Philadelphia in August of 2020. We had lived in blue states our whole lives. We wanted to see what it was like to live in a purple state, see what we can do. And so I lived for many years as a person who was full of anger and rage at how this country did not take care of their sick. They're elderly, they're poor, they're desperate. And I responded in my early years of activism with my ears and eyes shut, but my mouth wide open. And I'm sure that for a lot of you, that might have been your beginning as well, feeling a sense of outrage at what you saw in your lives. And that might be why you decided to turn your life towards one that is full of deep care for others and trying to right this system. So I've trained as a Buddhist meditation teacher for over a decade, and I'm inspired and guided by these three pillars in my life. One of them is the relational teachings of liberation, whether that comes from my spiritual teaching or through Black liberation theorists and writers and authors and poets. Um, the second one is cultivating this intimacy with the felt sense of the body that lets me know that I'm moving towards liberation and freedom, or if I'm moving towards deepening into my suffering. And so I really lean on this knowing of this body for that understanding. And the third pillar that I live by is never staying quiet. Knowing how deeply our lives are intertwined, I learned through my mindfulness practice how to open my eyes and to still feel all the fire, all the passion of anger in my body, but to use it as a catalyst towards the action of responding instead of reacting to the world that we're in. And so today I am speaking to you through this Zoom platform. And for some of us, that can feel like a very disembodied experience. And this might be a great time for some of you to catch up on your email or work on that project. But I really invite you to be here, to be present in the fullest way that you are able to. So I'm not just going to tell you to bring your full awareness to this offering, but to engage with the practice of presence together. And so before I give a talk or lead a meditation, before I would begin to do my work with vulnerable populations, I always take a moment to regulate my nervous system so that I'm available to be present to what's in the room, even in this virtual room. And in doing so, my intention is to create an energy that the rest of the room can attune to so that we can co-regulate together. We're coming from all different places. Some of us might be coming directly from working with a client or coming from, I don't know, the emergency room, coming from feeding a child or caring for an elderly parent. And so I want to take a moment for us to come together. And so as we work with our mindfulness practice, we know that the first foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of body and breath. To listen with the entirety of our bodies, the ears, the heart, the skin, our tummy, the breath, to bring a full body awareness and presence to every aspect of our lives, especially when we are in the practice of caring for others and when we're listening. And so I'd like to share a resourcing practice that I learned from the somatic experiencing world. This is an embodied psychotherapy practice that really engages the body in healing people with their trauma. And so this is a really beautiful practice that I encourage everyone to do before they walk into any room. And so if you want to begin this practice with me, go ahead and root your feet into the earth if you're sitting on a chair or if you're standing up. And if you're sitting on a cushion, just really bring your awareness, your attention to finding a sense of really rooting into your seat. So with my feet, I like to lift my toes, spread them wide, and then really feel them grounding into the earth as I rest them back down on the earth one at a time. I like to lift my heels, spreading my heels wide. And then as I rest the bottoms of my feet into the earth to really feel the four corners of the bottom of the feet rooting down. And so this resourcing practice begins by turning our chin over top of our right shoulder. And we're going to keep the eyes wide open, maybe taking a breath in. And as you breathe your breath out, we're going to turn our head slowly until we turn our chin over top of our left shoulder. Breathing the breath in again. And as you breathe out, turning your head in the other direction. So again, we're keeping our eyes open and you're moving at your own pace. And as we do this practice, we're going to begin to notice the different colors that are in our space. The brightness and the shadow, the solid colors and the colors that have print in them. We can notice the different shapes that are in our space. My space is a lot of sharp edges of boxes. Hoping your space is a little bit more softer shapes. You can notice the elements of nature. And so elements of nature can be noticing, for me, the haziness of the day outside, the trees, the plants that are in our homes, the other people that might be in our space, our dear pets that might be resting next to our feet. And you might even be noticing that the other sense doors are opening. So the sense door of hearing, as you notice sound that is near and far away as you turn your head. You might noticing the weight of a blanket if it rests on your lap. The texture of your socks as they hug your feet. Let's bring your heads back to neutral. Lifting your chin up and noticing the space above you. And then bringing your hands to either side and noticing the space to the right of you and to the left of you. And then bringing one hand in front of you as you notice this depth of the space that is in front of you. And perhaps turning around, noticing the depth of the space that is behind you. And then we will come back to our center. Perhaps taking a breath, bringing the shoulders up towards our ears. And as we breathe out, letting the shoulders slide down our backs. And preparing ourselves to listen with our full body. So I always find it kind of difficult to speak to a large room. I'm not sure who's in the space. And I'm always so conscious of finding that balance that everyone's needs are met. So not speaking down to folks with years of lived experience, and also to share these thoughts, ideas, and practices for folks who might be hearing them for the very first time. And so I thought the balance was to share a bit about my own practice and how mindfulness shows up for me. As some of you know, and others will learn, our mindfulness practice is not a one-size-fits-all. We are all going to have our own experience and ways that we utilize our mindfulness practice and our practice of compassion. So my intention is to support, to buoy, to lift up, to inspire, to remind us that we belong to each other. So please take what is useful, and what is not, you can just leave that behind. So the first 12 years of my teaching practice, I shared practice with the most vulnerable populations in New York City. So women who were living with addiction and supportive housing, those who were living with HIV and AIDS, those who were experiencing homelessness. And my heart work was rooted in the 10 years that I worked with young folks who were incarcerated in both the juvenile facilities where I was working with kids who were 12 to 16, and then on Rikers Island, which is the most notoriously violent city jail And I worked there at the adolescent population who were 16 to 17. This was before the Raise the Age campaign. And so at 16, children in New York City were considered adults at 16. And many of them were at the very beginning of their multi-year or life sentences. And in that work, as I'm sure you all have experienced in your work, it cleared away all the fluff that we see on the covers of magazines about what our mindfulness practice is supposed to be. We understand that our practice of mindfulness and compassion is not solely about this warm and fuzzy kumbaya feeling that can absolutely be a byproduct. Our mindfulness practice can allow us to have a place to land as we face the realness of what creates suffering in and around our lives, and how we can drop into the wisdom of our heart and mind and to feel some alleviation, some clarity on how to respond to the stressors in our lives without them breaking us apart. And there's been a lot to react to over these last 2 years. Loss of livelihood, loss of health, the loss of our freedoms. There isn't a single person in this room who hasn't been impacted by this global pandemic. I myself am recovering from COVID. Just last week was tested positive. There's also food instability in our world, dictatorships on the rise, the impact of multiple climate catastrophes, xenophobia, homophobia, racism, and the paternalism that has arisen once again as the government debates whether a woman has autonomy over her own body. It can really feel like too much to bear at times. And one of my teachers offered these 3 contemplations to me. And this is something that he offers and teaches at the beginning of each year. And it's something that I've taken on as my own practice, and also my practice of sharing with other people. So there are these 3 questions. What is it within me that needs to go, that needs to be let go of? So what is it within me that needs to let go? What is it that needs to be cultivated? And what is it that needs to be accepted? I love these 3 questions because they ask me to bring my attention to what I'm holding on to, what is holding me down, and preventing me from having a felt sense of liberation and freedom in my own lived experience. And so that first question, what is it within us that needs to let go? I think a lot about renunciation. And historically, when I thought of renunciation, um, what has popped into my mind are all the things that I can't have, right? Like the New Year's resolution, what I'm going to deprive myself of this year. Like this is the year that I'm totally going vegan, or this is the year that I'm gonna stop eating a whole bag of potato chips when I'm binging on whatever it is that I'm binging on at Netflix, right? And so these are all good things to create these boundaries, these ways to keep our hearts and minds and bodies healthy. These are all good things. But then these things become the enemy when we say, I can't have that in my life. And renunciation turns into this bad word associated with this rigid asceticism, completely void of joy. And so in Pali, which is an ancient language that was spoken in India about 2,600 years ago, the word for renunciation is ne kama. And I love it. First of all, I think it's just such a beautiful word, ne kama. But I love this made of 2 words, ne, which means out, and kama, which means to go towards. So renunciation in this context is not about what we're leaving behind, what we are resolving not to do anymore in this really harsh way, but it's rather this moving towards. And so this expansiveness, this space, this possibility of what's there for us. And so over these past few years of my practice, I began to hold renunciation as not all the things I can't have, but rather these gateways, these portals that support a deeper understanding of how I move through the world. Renunciation gives me the opportunity to uncover all that is available to me. When I let go of a mind that clings and grasps to hate and fear and things that are true only to me, it gives me the ability to pause and to consider what I gain through letting go of unskillful thought patterns and actions. It allows me to create new neural pathways that can create great impact not only on my own heart and mind, but those around me. And another thing I've been supporting a lot of folks with is this belief that we are not alone in this world, that we belong to nothing and no one. And one of my teachers says that one of the downfalls of Western civilization is that we don't think beyond the edge of our skin. And this is the impact of white supremacy in our culture. And to clarify what I mean, white supremacy does not mean white people, okay? White supremacy refers to this all-encompassing ideal rooted in fear that one race must dominate to the detriment of other races. So I also would say dominant culture. So it's not just rooted in race, it can be rooted in anything that is dominant in our culture, whether it be the dominant religion, the dominant sexual orientation, the dominant gender. And so with this idea, whether it's based on race or not, it seeps into our waters and doesn't allow us to reach out any further than we can touch, leaving us in isolation, not knowing not knowing that we belong to each other. And so what is it that needs to be cultivated is the second question of contemplation. And for me, I can never stop cultivating compassion and equanimity. And so compassion is that quivering of the heart. When you see the suffering of another person and you don't just witness it, something hits your body and you move towards action. So it's not just that sense of empathy. Compassion is that second piece of moving towards. And then equanimity. And equanimity is not a word that we throw around often in the English language. It's a very old-fashioned word, but I love this word. It's known to be the balancing factor throughout our practice. It balances out our faith, our wisdom, our energy. It protects the heart from going into envy, the excitement of joy from becoming agitated. It protects compassion from sliding into what some call compassion fatigue, which is really just pity. It's love and clear boundaries and tenderness without attachment to the outcome. Equanimity is the practice of a fierce heart. It allows us to go directly into the fire to see what's present, what needs to be tended to. Equanimity is not afraid, it does not back down. It stays present to whatever is arising. It is not apathetic, and it's definitely not void of emotion. And so compassion and equanimity is so important to me because without knowing, these were the two qualities of heart and mind that was awakened in me when my practice came alive for me. I was 9 years old. I knew nothing about the world, really. I knew nothing about this practice. But this experience completely changed my life. My family had been living abroad. My dad was in the Navy, hence, loving Republicans, Reagan era, you get it. And so I'd been living in Japan as a child, and we moved back to America when I was 9 years old. And this was the very first time that I saw folks who were experiencing homelessness. I was riding in the back seat of my parents' yellow Volvo, And we were driving through DC, and I remember it being cold and rainy, but that might just be my memory adding a little extra drama to the story. I don't know. But I remember riding in the back seat and seeing folks, and even as a 9-year-old child, I understood that these folks were sick, that they needed support, perhaps medical attention. And it was very clear that they were living on the streets, um, many of them not being with community, but sort of isolated. And I remember asking my parents, like, what is going on? What's happening? Being a Black Southerner, I was raised in a culture where we take care of everyone, no matter what. And growing up in Japan, I also saw the same, very similar culture where we really, really took care of our community. So seeing people on the streets without care, I didn't quite understand. And through my research, many years later, I learned that this era, this was about 1983, is when Ronald Reagan was doing a lot of shutting down of mental institutions during this time, giving people autonomy um, without the support of community, without having the proper systems in place to support folks. And for those of you who are elders in this space, who are healthcare providers, this might be a time in your practice that you remember um, with a lot of clarity. And so I remember that movement of my heart. I remember thinking to myself, I have to do something about this. And that was the time when I decided that I was going to move into the kind of life that allowed me to be in relationship with the suffering of people, to walk with them, to hold them in their suffering, and to listen deeply. I had no idea what that was going to look like, but that's when I set the intention. And so when I think about what I want to cultivate, I go back to that first memory of when I woke up to the possibility of this, and allows that to stay in my heart, allows me to stay in my heart. And then that last question is, what is it that needs to be accepted? And this is a hard one. What is it that needs to be accepted? There are so many things that are unacceptable in this world. But the question is, what is it that needs to be accepted? And over these past several months, I've been able to become aware of the violence that is within me. And because of my practice, this isn't alarming or scary, but rather a felt sense of the fullness of my humanity coming online. Yes, I am a compassionate, equanimous person, and I'm also a person that has violence in me. And part of this is my epigenetic inheritance of being a fusion of both the European slave master and the enslaved African. I can feel both the tension and the spaciousness, the complexity of it all. And so I am aware of this violence, and I am also aware of my capacity to be with it, to not give into it, but to see what's just on the other side of it. In these last 2 years, we had been sharing in this global trauma. For many folks, it has softened our hearts as we are understanding our connection and our interdependence to all beings across the globe. I was teaching a while back, and one of my students, when we were doing a question and answer part, was saying that during the meditation, at one point, she realized that she couldn't feel us in her meditation practice. She said, I was meditating, and even though we're on Zoom, I could still feel you all like palpitating in my practice. And then at one point, you all were just gone, and I couldn't feel you. And so she opened up her eyes and realized that the battery of her computer had died, And we literally were no longer there. Her computer had died. And so there's this awareness of this loss of connection. And this to me is the essence of our practice. We're not just sitting on our cushions for our own personal liberation, but rather for the liberation and freedom of all beings. And so, what I am accepting is yes, there is this violence in me because I am human, and it's just simply part of the deal. And as a psychiatrist and political philosopher, Frantz Fanon says, but then again, violence does not only mean to use physical force to injure, damage, or destroy. It also refers to a great force or strength of feeling, conduct, or expression. And this is where this community, our spiritual friends, come in. And so spiritual friends, also known as Sangha, are really the essence and the core in this radical act of self-preservation. Another one of my dear teachers, Reverend Zenju Earthlyn Manuel, says that our spiritual friends are there to assist us by reflecting back to us the ways in which we respond to the events of life. And this reflection doesn't mean that these friends are to sit in judgment of our actions or inform us of any wrongdoings. The reflection is silent. She says it's in the way we see ourselves in each other. When a friend falters or experiences discomfort, we in turn are there to witness the faltering and the discomfort, sensing the familiarity of their situation in our own lives. When a community member is happy, we see the joy in our own lives. Many have said to me that they do not need community. And my response has been, then where will you go when you begin to experience liberation? Who will know the journey you have taken and your vow to be awake? So again, that's from Reverend Zenju Earthlyn Manuel. And so this remembering is especially important to those of us who've devoted our lives to the care of others. Our community can support us by helping us remember that when we tend to ourselves, when we rest and hydrate and nourish ourselves, it gives us more space, more capacity, more creativity to show up more fully, to be in better service to those that we have taken a vow to not harm. And so one of my favorite quotes is by the great poet and activist Audre Lorde, whose birthday would have been next week. She says that caring for myself is not self-indulgent. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. And so caring for myself is not self-indulgent. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. And for so many of us, it's hard to pause and to take a mental health day, to take a lunch break, to pause before we walk into a room and to feel the breath breathing itself in and the breath breathing itself out. To take that moment to resource around the room, to regulate our nervous system so that our patients can attune to us. And so we need our community to support us around this remembering. It's important for us to pause and to contemplate what is our role, not only in our collective and global healing, but in the healing and building up the capacity for us to stay. As you know, we have lost so many in the healing professions over these last 2 years. And so, how do we build up the capacity, not only for ourselves, but for our colleagues to stay? So, I'm going to invite these 3 contemplations back into our space, and to give you all some space to be what they mean for your own personal liberation. I know for myself, after I hear a talk, I need to for everything to be really quiet for a little bit so I can sit with what I just heard and to kind of absorb it and to see what's true for me. And so I want to offer these 3 questions for you. I will put them into the chat so that you will have them again. In fact, I'll go ahead and do that right now. And so the 3 questions again are, what is it within us that needs to let go? What is it that needs to be cultivated? And what is it that needs to be accepted? And so I will invite you all to take some time for contemplation in the way that works best for you. For some people, it's really useful to stand up, to do a walking practice or qigong or yoga or chai tea to move the energy through your body. For others, it's useful to lie down, to rest the body, to allow the earth to hold us, to bring a hand to the heart and to the belly, and to listen deeply to what's alive in the body. For others, this is a great opportunity to journal, to write down these 3 questions and to see what comes up without thinking too deeply, but just to feel into the felt sense of the body and without any editing, just to see what pops up when you ask yourself these 3 questions of what is it within us that needs to let go, what needs to be cultivated, and what is it that needs to be accepted. And so this is just the beginning. I'll give us about 5 minutes for this contemplation. And then we'll come back at 1:15 and we'll open up the floor to hear what's alive for you, to see what questions are for you, anything else that needs to be unpacked. Alrighty. So thank you for your kind attention, and please stay. Please stay. Journal, move your body, contemplate, and I would really love to hear what's alive for you. So I will see you all in about 5 minutes. So enjoy this time. And I'm going to turn my camera off, and I'll see you in a few. Just taking about another minute to wrap up whatever practice you chose for yourself. Right. So I realized when I was offering you all um, an opportunity to kind of sit with this and allow it to rest in your body, I realized that what I needed was a big glass of water. So I just completely hydrated myself and then I laid down on my rug and it felt so nourishing just those few minutes. It doesn't take that long, right? And so I want to open up the floor to what my dear friend Bonnie Duran refers to as wisdom democracy. So a chance for you all to share in the wisdom of what you've learned about your own self-care, self-preservation, to share what arose for you in the talk, um, any questions that you might have, to share anything that needs to be witnessed. And sometimes saying things out loud, having them being witnessed by our colleagues is enough. It's enough. And so what I love to do is to have people come on so we can be in conversation, we can be in dialogue. And I know that for some people it might be easier for you to type in your question or your comments in the chat. And so what we'll do is I'll invite anyone, if you want to raise your electronic hand if you have a question, I'll respond to you. And then if you want to put something in the chat, Chris can also read those out loud. All right, so we'll alternate back and forth. So I see that, is it Niti has raised their hand? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for a wonderful talk, Leslie. It was just so heartwarming to hear you talk. And my question was, I feel, and it could be true for a lot of other healthcare providers, that I feel very manipulated or driven by my own ethos. And I feel whatever I however I defined my own values, my core values, how I wanted to show up in my life as a healthcare provider, I feel I find self-compassion difficult to be directed to myself because of how I have defined my own work ethics. And it's very hard to take that time off when you have time off, or decide to work less when you want to work less, or and it's not just with work, even as the parent you want to be, or the spouse you want to be, or the friend you want to be. I feel I have predefined a set role, how I wanted to show up in that world. And it's hard to recalibrate. So I wanted to hear what you would say to that.
Thank you for that question, for that inquiry, really. And you know, you what I heard you say from the very beginning is you have this set of ethos. Like you have like these are my values, this is what I stand for. And as as our life changes, as we get older, as we get deeper into um, our work, as we become parents, as we become partners, they're going to shift a little bit. Not completely changing, but things are going to shift a little bit. I was talking to one of my best friends about the battle between sleep training or not. And she was saying that she was speaking to another friend of hers about that. And she said, as a family, being well rested is one of our values as a family. It's a family value. And so because that is our family value, sleep training was part of what we did for our child so that we could all be well rested. Going around Robin's Hood barn, as my mother would say, but to say there's not we're not set in our ethos, we're not set in our values. We can bring in anything that we want, including compassion. And I think that once you name it and you allow people to witness you in saying, you know what, I really want compassion, self-care to be part of my ethos, you can't help but see opportunities to do that. People are going to ask you, hey, what's your self-practice today? You begin to seek out partners in self-care and self-practice, self-preservation. And so maybe you have, you know, a colleague that you say, hey, can you make sure that I get an hour lunch break every day? And maybe you hop on the phone and you just hear each other crunching to make sure that you have that hour of lunch break. So when we're well rested, that's where the creativity can come. We can understand how we can um, create the kind of life that we want. And again, it's really, really hard to do these things alone. And so definitely invite a co-conspirator in to really support you in staying aligned with your values. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And so, um, Janine, I see that Janine's hand is also raised.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so well. Thank you for being here today.
I want to thank you for all the work that you do. I've actually participated in other sessions that you've given. So, like I said, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. You know, over the past few years, it's interesting the three questions that you asked regarding reflection. And when I think about what I need to let go of and what I need to accept within myself, they're one and the same. And it's this perfection that I have to be perfect for myself, for everybody else. A couple of years ago, I did retire from the public health world, and there's just so much disconnect, discord, um, social, inequalities, inequities, and it's just, it's hard for me to sometimes, how can I say, balance that, if you will. And so I try to be kind to myself. So when we talk about what needs to be cultivated, because on top of all of that, I am a trauma survivor. So I take a lot of this suffering, right? And I've been cultivating the seeds of suffering, if you will, and taking those seeds and cultivating them into the fertile soil of kindness and compassion. And that has been really helpful for me, not to judge myself. So I just wanted to share that. It feels good just to even be in community here to share that. So thank you.
Thank you. That is so beautiful. So first of all, as many of you know that perfectionism is one of the main tenets of white supremacy, and it's so exhausting. It is so exhausting, right?
Mm.
And so I love that you're transforming. You're saying, I am a trauma survivor, and I am not defined by my trauma. I'm going to take this, I'm going to compost it, and see what beautiful fruits I can harvest from this. And that is just such a beautiful teaching that I can't hear enough. So thank you for bringing that forth and sharing that with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Chris, I want to see if there's anything in the chat that I need to tend to.
Got a couple comments in the chat and thank yous. And Dana's asking, I'm curious your thoughts on how to deal with fears and insecurities given different kinds of various experiences that maybe someone has had.
Dealing with fears and insecurities and working with other people?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna guess. I think that's what you're asking.
Just,
Um, yeah.
just to clarify, yeah, you're on point. Thank you. But it's more like in relations to people, yes, not necessarily patients, but also staff members and dealing with each other, basically. So
Yeah, and I find that when we are feeling, so the word that you used was insecure and fearful, um, which are big words. They're big words or big emotions. And so I'm wondering what's underneath that. And unfortunately, we don't have time to really, I would spend about 20 minutes like peeling these layers back to really get to the essence of it. But I'll just say that when I'm feeling insecure about speaking for medical professionals at Harvard, for example, you know, I root down and what I know is my truth. I don't try to be anything different than what I am. I don't try to know more than what I already know. I don't try to teach from a place that I don't know. And so for me, what really helps me to stay and to feel a sense of confidence um, is to really stay true to who I am, how I show up in the world, what's important for me, knowing my value system. Um, and that is, for me, like the primary thing in staying aligned. It really helps me to kind of shed all those fears and to be steadfast in what I offer. So thank
that
you.
is good. Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
One follow-up thing. What is your contact information if someone wants to get in touch?
Yeah, I think that you'll be sending that out. Is that correct, Chris or Fiona? Will you be sending out
We
my
will be
contact
sending that
info?
out. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great. Um, Donald Fleck. Hello, old friend. Haven't seen you in years.
Yes, hello, old friend. So we met a long time ago when I was participating in Occupy, and I was very touched. You must have been just 20 years old or something like that. A few years older, but anyway, I was very touched with your heart. And it's wonderful. I attend these grand rounds regularly, but then to see your name there was just a wonderful thing. And you might hear from my daughter who lives in Philadelphia at some point. My question is around right action. Um, During the last presidential election, I had a pretty clear idea of trying to get people out to vote as a right action and having a general orientation towards helping support leaders who have open hearts to people's needs. But I feel so pessimistic about the upcoming elections. I'm not sure what right action is. For now, I'm just doing something in a soup kitchen and a little undoing whiteness group. But I'm wondering, so the big thing is maybe if I feel something's not going to help, maybe I should just do local things like the soup kitchen. But it somehow doesn't quite feel right not to be involved in the helping support leaders with heart. And my question is, how might I get some more direction, or how might I overcome the pessimism? Something along those lines. And it's great to see you, Booker.
Yeah, you too. And yeah, pessimism, bitterness, exhaustion, fatigue. These are all words that I hear, especially when I'm working with folks in the political realm who are activists, who are organizers, who are in direct action. And I absolutely get that. Early when I was in my 20s and a long time ago in the early parts of my activism, I found that running around screaming and yelling. And I was doing so much pushing against, fighting against. And I was the one who got sick. I was the one who had to completely step back and heal myself in order to go back out into the world again. And so, my very simple advice around that is noticing what you are pushing against, who you are against, what you are against, and transform that into, and what do I stand for? and really bring your attention towards that. I stand for this. I'm supporting this because their values are aligned with me, as opposed to I'm pushing against them because they're not doing it. It's amazing how that negative bias language can really impact the heart, mind, and our health. And so really be in the what you are for and not what you are against. Thank you. And I know there are a lot more questions, and I was also told we have a hard stop at 2. And so, dear ones, thank you so much